Welcome, everyone. I am Enrique Acosta Gonzales, and I'm joined by Ashkan Tashvir. And in this episode, we will be speaking about the art of consensus building in divisive times. Now, Ashkan, division often doesn't lead to consensus, but as leaders, we have to employ all of our knowledge to get people to work as one, even in the midst of divisive times.
Yes, yes. So thank you, Enrique, for being with me one more time. And thank you, everyone, for listening to us or watching us on YouTube. Yeah, so this is a big topic, yeah? So, well, sort of like we didn't know what we're getting ourselves into, considering some of the things that are going on in the world at the moment. Yeah, so there's this topic of diversity, inclusion, equity, it's a kind of a trend topic that for a while now we've been discussing a lot. And obviously, like different political groups, they have a very, very different reactions, I would say, to this conversation. You see certain groups, they're actually really trying to um, explain that further. Let's say, for example, with the sustainability plan from the UN or things like that. On the other side, there's some that are seeing the sort of negative impact of like tokenism and things like that as well. But that's on the surface. Like, if you want to dive a bit deeper and go into the substance of the matter, things can look very different. On the surface, you see the conflicts, you see political stalemate, you see conflict in the interest, particularly interests of the people. You see that in the workplace as well, and in different environments. Because while fundamentally um, the branches of the tree are of the same root. There's a oneness. When it comes to our whatness, the essence of being a human being, in terms of the characters that we have in common, the corresponding in character and kind, like we're the same species. Um, but we relate to these different qualities quite differently, and we develop a different meta content, as I call it. When I talk about meta content, I'm talking about the differences in multiple different layers in our intellectual substrate of sense making and interaction with all the content in the world, all there is. The way that we relate to the dog, the cat, the plant, the food that we eat, the government, different institutions and constructs that we create, including social constructs in the way that our economy goes and everything. So when I refer to meta content, I'm talking about these multiple different layers of intellectual substrate for our sense making and interactions in the world. Things like our cognitive map, like what things are really for us. Um, how I do relate to love, how I do relate to commitment, promise, how I relate to loyalty and other qualities. Um, Also our shared our mental models, like how things work in our mind, yeah. Because like I have my understanding of how something works and you have different conception of how things work. This know-hows, this repository of know-hows. And there are other layers, things like perspectives, like we look into matters from multiple different perspectives. We have various different perceptions of the same thing. We have different interpretations or narratives of the same event as they're unfolding. Sometimes extremely like a polar opposite, yeah. Some incident um, occurs and a group of people celebrate over the death of certain other people, and then certain other people are going to be in grief. Certain um, candidate is being selected, and then one group of people, they think that um, that's the beginning of a great era in their whole in the country, and then some other people are in grief of the troubles that are going to be generated. So basically, when we look into humankind, like in the experience of human beings from a phenomenological perspective or common human experiences, when we look into those, then we see that these differences, not only in our appearance, like this, the pigmentation of the color in our skin or things like that, but also the ideologies. I mean, like when I refer to meta content, I'm talking like these meta contents can be um, imposed or proposed by various different religions and faith or ideologies, whether they're political ideologies or so. The so paying attention to this thing that every single person has these meta contents. You have your meta content, I have my meta content, and your meta content and all these layers within that has been influenced, whether you're conscious about them or not, by the dominating um, established meta contents that are imposed or proposed by various different forces in the world. The moment that you catch that, then that they catch that all you know is construct in a way, not all there is construct, but all you know is construct. And then we want to look into it, see from a personal perspective, do they serve the integrity of our life, like do they contribute in the integrity of our lives or not, and collectively the same, whether it's within a team, an organization, the whole society. We want to see whether or not these various different fragments in our meta content, in what makes us to make sense of the word and interact with the word and all there is in it. um, I mean, when we pay attention to that, and then we acknowledge that this all construct, then the power is in your hand, because then you can deconstruct that consciously and identify the misconstructed parts, the parts that are not really serving. And what you do is then you're going to reconstruct it. So this idea of the existing constructed meta content, and then the ability for us to actually deconstruct that and then identify the parts that are not well constructed or misconstructed and go through reconstruction process, is what can significantly change um, things out there in the world, and influences like the shared reality that we have created, including the institutions that we have uh, constructed on top of this meta content, and the constructs. Yeah. So to make it a bit more tangible is like the government bodies. There's all institutions, the university and academia institutions, the media institutions, like the companies and the corporations institutions, and and there are various different constructs that we've created, from like simple things like standing in the queue, um standing, like I mean stopping at a traffic light like when it's red, all the way to many different social constructs, that how a leader should be, how you should dress, like what kind of what are the codes of conducts and what are to do's and not to do's within a certain society or community, things like that. Now, creating all these contexts, obviously, because we have different meta content, yeah, we have different cognitive map, what things offer us. We have different mental models, how we do things. Yeah, not everyone does the same thing in a similar manner. Not everyone cook the same food with the same ingredient in the same manner. It's going to be very different. So and we know and we acknowledge that we have differences on the surface and we have different preferences. So there is a diversity. Now, this diversity at the time, I mean, at the same time, is like this light is being shined into the prism of humanity, and the light is being bent into multiplicity of colors. So on the surface, It appears, we appear to be very, very different, but down deep there, um, when we put the personas aside for a moment, when we, strip ourselves out of those labels and titles and pronouns and basically categorizations, then we'll see that no, there is this oneness, there's this unity. This is not merely spiritual conversation. This is a meaningful, practical conversation. Now let's explore that a bit further in a more tangible way. You're in a workplace and the teammates are quite different in their preferences, in their decision making, etc., etc. And and due to that, on the positive side, if those differences or different views are being nurtured and cultivated properly, then it's going to generate pluralistic views, meaning that we're not only to aggregate various different views when we're making a serious decision for the team, but actually we go through solicitations of these different views and ideas and come to a level of consensus needed for us to drive progress. Because if we get stuck in not being able to make an effective decision, or any decision, to start with, then we're in trouble. We're going to get stuck, and that's the kind of thing that we very often we find ourselves in. Some teams and organizations they acknowledge that, and then they have processes around it, and some they just like take it as if like life is occurring to them. So therefore, this diversity, if it's being or diverse views is being nurtured properly, it's going to lead us to have more views, coming up with more solutions, having more options, to seeing things from multiple different perspectives, and ultimately coming up with a better, effective working solution. And basically, that's going to lead to better deliverables. It's going to lead to effectiveness and workability. On the other side, if there are obviously diverse views and everything, but then if there is a kind of an environment that is not prepared to handle, to leverage that solicited ideas, then that's actually going to cause more trouble, because there's this diverse views, there's conflict interest, um, so you're going to deal with lots of barriers, lots of obstacles. You're going to get stuck. You can't move. You may be like a vehicle as a team that each of the wheels are going in their own directions. And obviously, as that analogy suggests, like that team, due to that lack of integrity, there's not going to be much effectiveness when they come to making decisions. So let me pass it to you, Enrique. Like, we created the context. We know that we're diverse and everything. That's a fact. That's not just an ideology. We are diverse, but then we talked about this thing that, like, how, as an organization, for example, you deal with that diversity or handle that diversity. If you deal with it effectively, it's going to produce more options, more views, better perhaps decisions, etc., etc. On the other side, like if it's not being handled well, it's going to lead to uh, it's going to be divisive, and it's going to lead us to stalemates and dead ends and like lack of workability. Yeah. Now, my question to you would be, what do you think is this thing in the middle that it can actually cause um, that mm, flourishing and effective environment or appropriate environment, that it's not letting the diversity of the views and everything lead to the trouble side and the shadow side of it, and drive progress by handling it differently, so that then we generate constructive, effective results out of it? What is it like? What can lead us to this or that?
So, a great question. And I believe if we start with what it is to have consensus, right? At the base level of what consensus is, it's a general agreement. And I think that a
Mm,
lot of times we got the definition of consensus wrong. We tend
mm,
to think that we have to believe and accept everything in order to have consensus. But that's not what the definition is. It's general agreement, meaning
mm,
I may not totally agree with what you're saying or how you believe or how you're executing, but in a general sense, I think that there are some aspects of what you're doing that I can say, you know what, yeah, I'm okay with that. Let's see how me giving a little way on that, because I do believe that could help, will allow us to progress in a way that's healthy, right? Something
yeah.
positive, something that we can get into. So if we are clear on what consensus is, I think then we can actually have a participatory engagement in what the ideas are in order for us to get to that place. But I believe that there are a lot of opportunities, and there's definitely a lot of responsibility on leaders to bring people to the knowledge of what will bring them to a place where things will be positive. And
Mm,
what it is the understanding. Now, you mentioned earlier metadata. Oh my goodness. Does that come into play a lot when we're trying to get consensus? Because there's just so much that's been given to us, and now we're trying to get these things to make sense. And
mm,
sometimes, because of those upbringings and because of those deposits and because of all of that, it just doesn't make sense. So what does the leader do? He brings in, or she brings in, that element of reasoning, that element of understanding, that element of clarity that we often miss when we're trying to come to a consensus. And I think if a leader can bring those three elements to any conflict environment where differences of thought are there, they will
mm.
get their people and those groups into a position to have a positive outcome.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, so the thing is, because like when it comes to, for example, diversity, inclusion, like all of these DEIs, there are studies that show that they actually contributed into the higher effectiveness, you would say. Yeah, so when you have more diverse group of people within your team or in your leadership, then you're going to produce better, more results. At the same time, there are studies that showed that it actually had the complete opposite. Yeah. So prioritizing having diverse group of people, particularly like just perhaps looking into the surface level, like identity kind of differences, yeah, then it actually had the opposite effect. Now, then the question is like, wait a moment. So how come, like in some groups of people, like in certain organizations, they've managed to shape diverse groups of people, and it impacted like positively, and then on the other side, like we have these other organizations or other studies with observing their control group, and they actually not only that they didn't produce better results, but even worse results. So that basically made me to think from a philosophical perspective that there should be an element in the, or not just one, but there is something in between that it's a kind of a lurking variable. Yeah, so there's a lurking variable problem. There's something that we're not paying attention to. And my guess, my understanding of that is the way we handle that. Yeah, so the way that we relate to diversity, is that like just a different skin color or like different gender? Like, is that all that? Or no, actually, there's the more authentic, congruent way to relate to the diversity of people in terms of the having people with coming from different background, like competency, for example, in terms of competency and how they can complement each other. So for example, like if you're building a startup, you don't want everyone to come from a engineering background, because a kind of a typical engineering mindset is like, like I'm partly engineer, like that's part of me. And the part of you as an engineer is this thing that you want to sit in your in the silo, and you want to play with your Lego. Yeah, you want to just like perfect things. And but then, for example, you need people within your team with a way more, perhaps even aggressive, hunger, from a commercial perspective, like the people that they are very into influencing the perceived value of the offering, those the Legos that are being built, like by the engineers. So you want people that they go and then laser focus on tackling technical problems. At the same time, you want people to have the characteristic of like going out there and talking to people and influencing, and you know, so so you need diversity of people in terms of competency and their being, like the way that they express themselves, etc., etc. So now here's the thing, the thing that the lurking variable is, one, I would say, like how we relate to this diversity of views and everything. Or for example, like you mentioned, consensus, like how do we relate to consensus? Like, is that like, I think consensus is like you need to be exactly uh shape, you need to shape an exact meta content like mine. So it's like we need to become identical, like for example, like for any team to actually operate and produce something, there is a level of mutual understanding that needs to be in place, and that's partly what the leader would cause. Yeah. And you want to have a degree of shared mental models, meaning that like you want the team to be on the same page with regards to how what the processes are, how we do these things and how we do those things. Of course, everyone can challenge it every now and then, and you can refine your processes. But while once the processes are in place, then like there's going to be a level of um, agreement, and just you should obey what is being there as process until like you can challenge it and then you can change it. Yeah, not in the middle of the um, game. So um, no, in order for, I mean, like, so basically sometimes some people may think that we need to become identical. It's like shared mental model is exactly like we are exactly seeing things in the same manner. While that ideal, I mean, it's not going to happen perhaps, and I don't think necessarily it's a healthy thing to actually even try to make that happen, to standardize everything. And so to find that balance, and in looking into these lurking variables, I think how we deal with this diversity matters the most. And now let's make it a little bit more tangible. Yeah. So, for example, is the approach in dealing with conflicts, or even like in setting meetings when we're going to make serious decisions for the team, is it like everyone comes into the meeting with with epistemic humility, with openness and vulnerability, and they're sitting there and they're actively listening to each other? Yeah, it's like I have my views around what decision is to be made. This other person has their views with what they think is the right thing. Am I coming in the meeting just to do whatever it takes so that I can convince the other party because obviously I'm right and I have the best solution? Or no, I go there with this approach that I'm going to present my solution, and then I'm going to let the other people present their solution, and I'm going to actively listen, not to find something so that I can resist and I can pinpoint their problems, but actually going, oh, wait a moment, maybe, just maybe, their solution would work better. And I want to try to put myself in their shoes. And and so basically there's this willingness of being open, being vulnerable, going there, because it's not, I'm not prioritizing me being right or me being taking the credit of the best solutions offered. I can put aside that righteousness temporary so that I see, and we know down deep there, yeah. So if there is a better solution being offered, yeah, so we let that to go ahead, because what we care and we prioritize is the objectively we want to ensure the project being successful, yeah. So just like one of them, like, are we vulnerable enough, are we um, going into the meeting with a level of presence, and on the other side, like this other person, to be transparent, not pushing hidden agendas, no. Now we know that that doesn't happen often, like when it comes to corporate settings and teams, etc. The thing is, we clearly know through our experiences working with different organizations, supporting them, building their culture, the teams and organizations that they start cultivating, I mean, they start creating these communications, preparing more authentic, open um, environments and team culture, they'll they have it much easier. So there's this level of ease and flow in the decision making process, in the way that people are free to deal with matters as they come, and they can, the communication flows, and there are the ones that they don't need to deal with the office politics and like pushing their agenda and lots of hidden conversations, etc., etc. So basically, this is part of the being discourse and some of the qualities that we talk about, like vulnerability, presence, things like that. And it's a kind of an entry point to influence the shared meta content of the team, yeah, which basically means their cognitive map, what things are for them, their mental models, like how they know things work, processes, and then how they may interpret the events as they're unfolding, the narratives, perspectives, etc., etc. Yeah. Do you have anything you would like to add to that, Enrique?
Yeah, as you was describing that, it took me back to meetings, right, at the
Yeah,
corporate settings. But how nice would it be if, when someone brought something up, that you would say, you know what, Ashkan, what you just shared makes a lot of sense to me. But have you considered the impacts of XYZ? Because
yeah,
as you was sharing that, I started thinking about that. How have you considered that into how
yeah,
how you thinking about this solution?
yeah,
That's a consensus conversation, right?
yeah,
I don't have it all right. You don't have it all right. I heard you intently, and wow, you have a point, but I noticed that you left this out. Have you considered that? And
yeah,
those types of meetings are the ones that bring out the best of everyone, because you go into it understanding, hey, I don't have it all in the bag. And but if I listen, I may say, wow, that might be great, but I do know that this thing is lingering over here. And that's how I think most meetings should go,
yeah,
instead of the meetings for mandates, right? Which means, hey,
yeah,
everybody get together for an hour. I'm going to tell you what it is, and this is how it's going to be. Okay, go.
yeah, yeah. Now you beautifully like put it in words. Like the thing is, there, I'm pretty sure there are people that are listening to us that they will go, "Oh yeah, of course. Like this is a kind of an ideal. Like this is more like a fairy tale that the meetings go like that." I get where they may come from, because this is the ideal that you put there and then you want to work towards. But see, sometimes we put the ideal so high that then um, we're already defeated, that there's no way we can get there, you know. And our experience shows that no, the organizations, we work with many different teams that they incorporate a high degree of that. As a matter of the fact, like they support the newcomers into the team to actually integrate themselves uh, and into that kind of an environment and culture. And that's not for everyone though. Like some people, they just don't want to. They don't want to integrate in the such culture. But to a great degree, it is possible. And that's the thing. That's like the whole meta content discourse, the book meta content that I've written. Like it talks about the intellectual substrate for sense making, how we make sense of things, and the being framework, which is the contextualized version of the meta content in human behavior, in our interactions, in our performance in life. We actually have the discourses and the tools and the frameworks for us to deeply look into our own intellectual substrate, our own meta content, as well as like the other team members, especially as leaders. And we do have tools that it can actually support us, facilitate this culture building. It's not going to create a fixed culture for you, but actually it's going to support organization with the help of the right coaches and consultants, the people that are trained in the discourses and the frameworks and the tools, so that they can actually build cultures that it's unique to them still, but in principle it just creates the foundations that they can foster this transparency that we talk about, the presence that is required, the active listening, the ease and flow in the communication, the vulnerability. And so we work on quite a good number of these qualities as it suits the team. So we know that it's possible. We've seen the results, um, and the tools and the frameworks that are available for it. So yeah, so the message here is yes, it may seem quite eudaimonic or like a kind of utopian, but with a high degree of that, it's possible. But then the thing is, it's like hygiene, you know. So you don't go take a shower only once. It's not a one-off project. Like that's why you do it like on a continuous basis. Like you do it every day or something like that, because once that's established, then you need to maintain its integrity. And that's something that some organizations and teams they prioritize, and some others they just deprioritize that. And it's so vivid when we look at and when we compare these two different organizations. um yeah, so that's the thing. I hope that you enjoyed the conversations we had around building consensus, particularly in divisive time. And I hope that this is a kind of an encouragement for you to have a look into the meta content book and the being and human being book, which are the exposition of the being framework. Enrique, anything else you would like to say before we wrap it up?
Yeah, consensus is achievable. It's up to the leader to set the stage for that. As you mentioned, some of it may seem like a fairy tale type of goal, but you can do it. And it doesn't even have to be against your grain, it could be naturally brought out. If you really want consensus, it's up to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Enrique, and thank you very much, everyone, for being with us.